Go to pull on the trigger the second time, I got nothing. Accuracy's there, just no semi-automatic fire. That's a little discouraging again. I want to tell you about a couple of things that kind of went tits up on this rifle from the very beginning.
0 North Mont, Department 4, open 9119. Any Halbeck units at 21779 9457.
Well, this wasn't the review I had planned. I had hoped to make a sleek video about one of the most innovative rifle concepts to come out recently. But hey, this is OG's Danger Show. You guys have been disappointed every time I release a new video. I guess it was time for me to experience a little disappointment. Oh, by the way, spoiler alert, this rifle crapped out on me more than once. More than twice even. One round. I go to pull on the trigger the second time, I got nothing. But we eventually found the key to success, and now the damn thing runs like a scalded dog. So pull up a chair, grab a cold drink, and let me tell you the story of Foxtrot Mike's ranch rifle. It all began in January, the year of our Lord 2024, when I found myself lost in the desert and surrounded by men with guns. Okay, that sounds a little dramatic because I was actually lost at SHOT Show in Las Vegas, and I was surrounded by every type of rifle, pistol, and shotgun you could ever imagine. Well, one product actually caught my eye, and it's called the Ranch Rifle. It's made by a company called Foxtrot Mike. You might know I'm a fan of fighting rifles that break out of the traditional assault rifle mold. And you can unwad your panties because I too think the term assault rifle is BS, but stick with me on this for a second. I recently escaped from behind enemy lines. That's California. But while I was there, I became super interested in rifles that were legal in restrictive blue states. Rifles that were reliable and versatile enough that the average Joe could use them wherever he lived to defend his home and his family. Because of this, I've done reviews on the Mini 14 and the Fight Light SCR and even the Keltec RDBC as viable alternatives to the evil AR-15. Now, before you go wadding those panties again, these rifles aren't just there as alternatives to your beloved AR. Whenever I do one of these reviews, I always get comments like, just move to a free state, or nothing will ever replace my AR. Okay, I gotcha. I'm an AR owner. I have quite a few of them, and I think I bought most of them, almost all of them, while I was behind the granola curtain. And most of them weren't even Cal Unicornia compliant. And I'm not alone. Most guys I knew down there have fully functioning rifles with normal capacity magazines, but there are some dudes who want to abide by the law. They don't want to mess with AR-style rifles. Some guys in some places can't even take them to their local ranges for fear of being spotted and investigated by nosy Karen range staff. And remember, there's a lot of us that own ARs and just want something new and different. We need to celebrate innovation instead of shitting on anything that we don't understand or that we don't already own. Well, this is where Foxtrot Mike enters the chat. I spoke with Paul Noonan, the owner of Foxtrot Mike at SHOT Show, and I asked about this cool 50-state compliant rifle that still looked like a badass fighting rifle. Paul explained to me that his concept was to provide an alternative for those folks stuck in restrictive states who wanted a good home defense alternative to the AR. So I was intrigued. I liked this guy's way of thinking. And then I found out his company was right down the mountain from me in Boise, Idaho. So I asked Paul if he'd send one of their ranch rifles to me for testing on the show. Well, unlike most of the vendors at SHOT Show, Paul agreed to do so. And then, even more shocking, he had one shipped to me right away. When I opened the box the ranch rifle came in, I was excited as a little schoolgirl. I loved this concept, and I was already making plans for it to be my new truck gun since I travel through these restrictive states pretty often. Well, here comes disappointment number one. I went to pull the trigger of the ranch rifle before I'd even shot it, and I found it extremely difficult to operate. Now, I had an injured trigger finger at the time, so I thought maybe it was me. But a few tests on the digital Lyman trigger pull gauge showed between 11 and 12 pounds. Now, the ranch rifle has an innovative trigger. It's hinged at the bottom, down here in the trigger guard, and the top operates as an action bar that then pulls a trigger pretty much like an AR-15. But this trigger, innovative or not, was more difficult to pull than Rosie O'Donnell in a rickshaw.
You're disgusting.
Now, I fired off an email to Foxtrot Mike, and that very evening, Colton, the customer service rep, replied and asked me to bring it to him. So a few days later, when he had it in his hands, he said, nope, This shouldn't be like this. In a couple of hours, Colton called me and he said all was fixed. He even sent me a video of him running the rifle rapid fire at the range. So the trigger problem was solved. Fast forward to spring break. My son-in-law was visiting and agreed to give the rifle a good workout on camera. Now this guy is a Marine and he knows his way around a rifle. But we were only about 20 or 30 rounds into our test when the rifle stopped shooting semi-automatically. That's right, it would fire a round, it would cycle a new live round, but there was no trigger pull. And the bolt had to be manually cocked to get the damn thing to reset. Well, when you manually cocked the bolt, it ejected the live round that was in the chamber and then brought in a new round, and the rifle would fire again, once. So another call to Colton, and I was dropping the rifle off for another look. A couple hours later, I got another video of the rifle running fast and smooth. Bam! Problem solved. Oh no, OG. A couple weeks later, I took my repaired rifle to the abandoned cartel runway to finish up this review. I was about 200 rounds into filming when the rifle shit the bed again. It had the same trigger reset problem. So back to Foxtrot Mike, and once again it was repaired and test fired. And this time Colton explained that they had some problems with one of their vendors of their trigger components, but that all was bueno now. So back up the mountain I go, and I took it to the Indian Burial Grounds in the woods near my town. Unwad your panties, it's really just a gravel pit. I was having a good old time running my twice repaired ranch rifle when about 200 rounds into the final test, the trigger problem happened again. This is the third time. To say I was disappointed would be an understatement. I really, really wanted this rifle concept to work. This is one of the few things that I've been excited about in a long time. But it didn't seem like it was ever going to happen. This was the kind of rifle that would solve so many problems for so many guys living in nutty blue cities. I have finally resigned myself to making one more trip, and I'm glad I did. This time, Colton replaced that standard trigger with one of their optional Hyperfire triggers. And holy crap, did it improve the trigger pull. When I got the trigger to work in the past, it usually broke at around 7 or 8 pounds. But after the Hyperfire, it's a short, crisp 3-pound trigger. Now, if I haven't scared you off, and you're thinking about buying a Foxtrot Mike ranch rifle, which I can highly recommend, be sure to get the optional Hyperfire trigger. I'm pretty sure the original trigger was the culprit, and it seems like Foxtrot Mike should just toss in the better triggers from the get-go. My ranch rifle is well into about 700 rounds now with this new trigger, and not a single issue. It shoots fast, it's combat accurate, and sometime along in the dark days of the crappy triggers, I was shooting 1/2-inch groups from 50 yards, benched. The entire rifle is very light and very agile. I was able to zap multiple steel bad guys at 50 and 60 yards the other day, with split times only slightly slower than my best AR. So what makes the ranch rifle run? Well, magic. No, really, it's a bufferless bolt design that operates off of 2 springs. One pushes it to the rear and one pushes it forward again after it fires. I'll lay the components out here on the table for you to take a look at, and without me going into the minutia of how this thing functions, you can get a pretty good idea of the operating system. Unlike the Fight-Lite SCR, there are no springs and plungers that go down into the stock. Everything is contained right here in the upper and lower receivers. The ranch rifle is charged by an offhand charging handle, the one opposite from your firing hand. And it has 4 positions, left or right side of the forend and up or down. So you can switch it if you're a lefty and Jesus made you wrong. It's non-reciprocating, a big fancy term that means the charging handle won't slam into your widow fingies while shooting and chip your newly painted nails. On one of my visits to Foxtrot Mike, Colton dropped in their optional Paratrooper charging handle, a longer handle that keeps your hand away from the Picatinny rails when you're actuating that charging handle. I guess with the short, original handles, some customers were dragging their delicate skin along the Picatinny rails and making little boo-boos. Well, either one of these charging handles activates a long guide rod and spring, pushing the bolt back into the upper receiver to load the first round. So while the receiver kind of looks like an AR-15, you can't help but notice the lack of a pistol grip. And that's what makes this thing compliant in most states. So in places like California, you've got no collapsible stock, no pistol grip, and no flash hider, making this rifle perfectly legal. It comes from the factory with a traditional shaped stock, since it doesn't need a recoil buffer and buffer spring. Foxtrot Mike ships the rifles with either the beautiful Wooks wooden stocks, or they'll ship it with synthetic Hogue stocks, tan or black, or my favorite, the Magpul Remington 870 stock like this one. The Magpul stock makes this rifle just a little rear end heavy, but if you've ever seen any of the Kardashians, you know that's not always a bad thing, and I didn't find it to be a negative with the ranch rifle. These rifles take any old AR magazines, although oddly, they seem to prefer the aluminum magazines like my Fight-Lite SCR did. I had no malfunctions whatsoever, but the metal magazines just inserted and fell free much easier than polymer mags. I think the magazine well is just slightly tighter tolerances than most of your ARs. You guys tell me in the comments below, but it's my opinion that the Ranch Rifle looks best with the 20-round magazine. Either my old Colt magazines or the curved Magpul magazines. The Ranch Rifle sports a 16-inch barrel, chambered in .223 Wild. And if you're new to our land, the .223 Wild is a more universal chamber dimension that allows a guy to shoot .223 or .556 without any worries. The barrel comes with a 4-port muzzle brake, but if you live in a place where you can't have any muzzle devices, Foxtrot makes a version without a threaded barrel, so no evil muzzle brakes can even be attached. Think of all the lives that will be saved. And I'm glad you asked. It's a traditional mid-length direct-to-gas impingement system, so it's about as reliable as we've come to expect from our ARs, and it shoots really soft and really flat. A lot of what makes that Ranch Rifle controllable is that 4-port brake, and it works well, but damn is it loud. But fear not, most of you live in places where it can just be swapped out to an A2 birdcage or any old muzzle device that you choose. But Foxtrot Mike tried to design a rifle that could be sold immediately in most states. Moving back, we see an upper receiver that is longer than a normal AR receiver, and that's necessary to accommodate the traditional hunting style grip. But this also allows for more rail space up on top. The 15-inch forend on the Ranch Rifle also has pick rails at 12 o'clock, but it has M-LOK slots at 3, 6, and 9 o'clock, so this thing will mount just about any accessory you can think of. And maybe it's me. Well, no, it's not me, because most people think that traditional stock rifles look better with a scope or LPVO. I happen to have a Vortex Strike Eagle, 1-to-6 power, sitting around the office, and I threw it on top of the Ranch Rifle. It turned out to be a great fit, but of course you can run a simple red dot up there if that's what makes you moist. So here's an issue that's not really an issue. The Ranch Rifle has a reversible cross-bolt safety in the usual place for a rifle with this type of grip. But when you've got your firing grip on the Ranch Rifle, your trigger finger can't quite reach the magazine release button because of that extended receiver. It reaches the safety just fine with the original firing grip, and that's the important one. I found I had to break my grip just a little and allow my shooting hand to slide forward on the receiver to span the distance between the trigger guard and the magazine release. Now once the magazine release button was pushed, the mag drops free and the firing hand can just slide very easily back into your firing grip. Now people complain about this kind of stuff a lot, but it isn't really a problem in the real world. It feels a little odd at first, but it didn't really slow me down. And most of us get too wrapped around the axle over magazine changes anyway. We are very unlikely to be in a multiple magazine gunfight anytime soon. The controls are ambidextrous, and the bolt lock, bolt release is the familiar AR paddle style, so you'll feel right at home there. So back to this trigger. Yes, it hinges on the bottom, down at the trigger guard, making the trigger pull more of an up and back affair instead of the traditional straight back pull of an AR-15. This takes a minute to get used to, but again, it runs fast and I think you'll be just fine during your gunfight with the Hells Angels. Now, although I didn't run this thing against a shot timer, my split times were a little slower than I'm used to, and just a little bit. But remember, this is a Ranch Rifle. It's designed more for home and farm protection, and not as much for kicking indoors in Fallujah. So like my parents when I was a little kid, I went from repeated disappointments with the Foxtrot Mike Ranch Rifle to loving it. I'm rarely excited about long guns, but this thing is a fun alternative to AR-15s, even if you already own a ton of them. And remember, we need to applaud innovation instead of shitting on it. If we didn't have companies like Foxtrot Mike trying to provide great defensive rifles to everyone in the U.S., some of us would be stuck with bolt-action rifles, and some of us would be stuck without the ability to own a viable long gun for self-defense. As for me, the Ranch Rifle has now proven itself to be reliable enough to travel with me when I cross state lines into unfriendly territory. And if having a rifle like this as my only long gun in my truck on multi-state trips isn't endorsement enough, I don't know what is. Just remember to order your Ranch Rifle with the Hyperfire trigger. It seems to be the key to making that Ranch Rifle the awesome performer that I now throw in my truck. You'll thank me later. Now, I can't leave a link to Foxtrot Mike on YouTube, but I trust you can navigate Google enough to dig up their website. And if you order one, tell them you saw it on OG's Danger Show. Well, you guys stay safe out there, stay armed whenever and wherever you can, and until next video, OG out.